morning, everybody. I'm Janel Curry, and I'm the moderator of this session. And this session is History and Philosophy of Science 2. We have two speakers in this session. So the middle one of the three is not here. So what we're going to do is have each of the two speakers stay to their 20 minutes. And then if we will have more time for discussion at the end, if you want to stay and talk further. We will start with Don Stork and his talk on science and Christianity, models and metaphors through a mirror dimly.
Good morning. Christianity and science rely on analogies, metaphors, and models in their exploration of reality, pursuit of truth, and communication of their beliefs and findings. This presentation examines the question of to what extent models might be useful tools for gaining a deeper understanding of the relationship between Christianity and science. First, I briefly survey the use of models for portraying the relationship between Christianity and science. Next, the Christianity theology of nature model is explored in depth. And a final section examines the importance of the contextual nature of science and Christianity relationships. A metaphor is a figure of speech that describes an object or action in a way that is not literally true, but helps explain an idea or make a comparison. It equates two things not because they actually are the same, but for the sake of comparison or symbolism. For example, the Lord is my shepherd, or cellular machinery. Analogies are also employed. The purpose of an analogy is not merely to show, but also to explain. In discussing the use of analogies in science, Ian Barbour writes that as an aid to inquiry, an analogy is the extension of patterns of relationship drawn from one area of experience to coordinate other types of experience. While a metaphor is something, an analogy explains how one thing being like another helps explain them both. For example, Rutherford's comparison of the hydrogen atom to the solar system. A third term, model, is the main focus of this paper. Models are used to convey explanatory or predicted comparisons and may employ both analogies and metaphors. John Polkinghorne writes, a model is based on a picture of reality which reproduces certain features thought to be relevant for addressing a particular issue without pretending that the model offers a fully ontologically adequate account of the nature of complex reality. Models offer partial, valuable insights, but not complete understanding. One may often employ a variety of different models of the same entity, useful for different purposes, even if these models would be mutually incompatible if taken to be literally precise. Models that explain a new phenomenon by analogy or metaphor are common in science. Frequently mentioned examples are the Bohr model of the atom and the double helix model of DNA. While not so readily obvious, models are employed within Christianity as well. Models help us to wrap our finite minds around the concept of a God who is both transcendent and immanent. Here we would struggle with religious language. Sally McFague writes that in reference to God, deeply religious people feel conviction at the level of experience, at the level of worship, but great uncertainty at the level of words adequate to express the reality of God. McFague adds that our models are still extremely useful and vivid ways of thinking about God that allow the use of vocabulary and images of our own world to describe something that ultimately lies beyond it. The Bible does not give us a single model for the nature of the Christian triune God, but rather employs a range of complementary, interacting descriptions of God as shepherd, king, redeemer, ransom, rock, cornerstone, living water, comforter, etc., all that contribute to our understanding of God. Models may also prove useful in describing how science and religion relate in general, and for the focus of this paper, science and Christianity specifically. Ian Barbour's fourfold typology of conflict, independence, dialogue, and integration is perhaps the most well-known of the models describing the relationships between science and religion. A very brief review follows. In the conflict model, one discipline or the other claims to be the only source of truth. Sides must be taken. One is right, the other is wrong. As Polkinghorne writes, the choices are between a totally omnicompetent science or an infallibly omniscient religion. The second model, independence, claims that each discipline uses different methods and different languages to address different questions, and therefore neither side can claim to answer the other's questions. They're compatible because they are two completely separate but legitimate practices with no overlap at all. Stephen Jay Gould's non-overlapping magisterium or NOMA model is perhaps the best known example. Dialogue is Barbour's third model. In this model, science and religion may profit from both their differences and their similarities so that each enlightens the other. Here Polkinghorne opines that there should be a mutually respectful interaction between the insights of the two disciplines. Barbour's last model is integration. The model describes an interaction aimed at a unified system where science and religion are merged into a single discipline. The danger is obvious, with the risk of one discipline dominating the other and becoming a form of what Marx Denmark identifies as the replacement model. Barbour identifies three versions of the integration model: natural theology, a systematic synthesis that can be associated with process theology, and a theology of nature. The theology of nature model in its various forms is prominent in the science and religion community today and warrants a closer look. Unlike natural theology, a theology of nature does not flow from nature towards an argument for the existence of the Creator. Instead, a theology of nature starts from a religious tradition based on religious experience and historic revelation. Pannenberg writes, if the God of the Bible is the creator of the universe, then it's not possible to understand fully or even appropriately the processes of nature without any reference to God. He continues, there is more to nature than simply what the scientists, working within the confines of established disciplines, has been able to report. The reality of God is a factor in defining what nature is, and to ignore this fact leaves us with something less than a fully adequate explanation of things. Thus, a theology of nature asserts that it provides a more comprehensive and a more coherent view of our experience of reality than non-theistic approaches. It then follows that a Christian theology of nature rests on a Christian historical revelation recorded in the Bible, religious traditions, experience, doctrines, and the ongoing activity of the Holy Spirit. John Hout writes, a Christian theology of nature tries to express what the natural world means when we take it to be grounded in the reality of the God who in Christ and through the Spirit makes all things new. He continues, the theology of nature does not deny that science can put the human mind in touch with nature, or that science can reveal previously unknown things about the universe. Yet without taking anything away from science, it proposes that there are levels of depth in nature that science simply cannot reach. Polkinghorne agrees, arguing that a theology of nature can provide a satisfying understanding of the scientific discerned character of the world. And as always, a judgment of satisfying leads to further discussion. Here, Barbour and others hold that some traditional religious doctrines need to be revised based on current science. That is, if religious beliefs are to be in harmony with scientific knowledge, some adjustments or modifications are called for. Arthur Peacock holds a similar position. He writes that for religious persons, the terms which describe the reality to which they are committed are not, should not, in his view, be regarded as fixed and irreformable. Such believers should always be ready to expand their terms, to take in new meanings, and to enrich their imaginative resources as their consciousness and experiences changes and enlarges, not the least with the growth of the natural sciences. As such, one holding to a theology of nature position might contend that theology would always be provisional, at least to some extent, requiring adjustment or revision as our understanding of nature changes. Thus, a theology of nature might seem to subordinate Christianity to science, and in doing so, limit the Christian triune God to what science has proven. The continuous pressure to modify or abandon Christian beliefs or foundational doctrines can result in a refined faith, or more worryingly, an impoverishment of our vision of God and the redeeming work of Christ. Writing about Darwinism, Alistair McGrath reminds us the history of Christian thought is characterized by a constant process of revisiting and reevaluating existing interpretations of the Bible, which is precipitated and catalyzed by many factors, including scientific advance. And with scientific advance, conflict may arise between a contemporary scientific theory and a personal Christian belief. Mark Stenmark suggests there are three possible responses. Religious beliefs take precedence, scientific theories take precedence, or neither religious beliefs nor scientific theories take precedence, because the response must be decided on a case-by-case basis. And this thought leads into a discussion of context. Context is important. John Hedley Brooks writes, "There is no such thing as the relationship between science and religion. It is what different individuals and communities have made of it in a plethora of different contexts. Just as one may employ a variety of different models for greater understanding of an item of scientific or religious interest, for example, wave versus particle in the behavior of light, or in the atoning work of Jesus and the theological models of ransom, redemption, and sacrifice, consideration of how a given model of Christianity and science might apply within a variety of contexts can provide opportunities for increased insights, engagement, and dialogue." Peter Harrison cautions that while abstractions of various kinds are a necessary condition for knowledge, that abstractions within the categories of science and religion have a tendency to take on a life of their own and to overshadow the realities they're meant to represent. Harrison adds that they should be employed with a renewed sensitivity to their limitations and the inherent distortions to which they inevitably give rise. Religious dogmas do not compromise the totality of religious life, neither do scientific theories embody all that there is to the scientific enterprise. Stenmark picks up Harrison's argument and warns against a simplified, one-dimensional picture of science and religion. He proposes a more philosophically sophisticated, multidimensional model, one that includes consideration of social, teleological, methodological, and theoretical contexts. A brief discussion of the social context has import to our discussion. Stenmark emphasizes that Christianity and science are social practices with many layers, not merely sets of beliefs or theories plus certain methodologies. These social practices are performed within specific historical and cultural contexts and consist of all the activities that Christians and scientists participate in when ensuring the goals of their particular practice. Stenmark argues that we must recognize that neither the sciences nor the religions can be aggregated as similar collections of practices. This leads to the impacts of religious and scientific pluralism. Religious pluralism is usually understood to include the worldwide range of religious approaches. But here I use the term in a limited fashion to address the range of beliefs and practices within the broad category of Christianity specifically. Discussion of relationships between Christianity and science should be conducted with an understanding that just as there's no generic amorphous religion void of the specific beliefs and practices of the various space, the same holds true within the broadly defined category Christian. Marked differences exist in doctrine and practice within Catholic and Protestant religions. Denominational differences exist within Protestant churches and even between conservative and liberal congregations within a denomination. Similar parallels exist within Catholicism. It should not be assumed that the relationship between science and Christianity would be the same for all Christians, and that any one particular model would correctly represent them all. Stenmark writes, participants in the science and religion discussion hold more diverse views about religion than their views about science, and it would be a mistake to think that the relationship between science and religion would be the same for all sciences. Like religion, there are varieties of what we generally know as science and its practices and traditions. Thus, it would be a mistake to assume the relationship between Christianity and science are the same for all sciences and in all models. Pluralism also exists within the sciences. Peter Harrison writes, "The persistence of questions about the unity of science which arise out of either an awareness of the histories of the sciences or present-day analyses of the objectives and methods of the various sciences suggests that there can be no normative science-religion relationship as such, for the sciences are plural and diverse. Consequently, each science potentially represents a different context and a different relationship to Christianity. How any relationship between Christianity and science is perceived is influenced by the science lens through which one views the relationship. For example, cosmology, plant physiology, physical chemistry, material science. Thus today, questions about human origins or cosmogenesis might be more troublesome to foundational Christian beliefs than molecular biology's contributions to the development of the COVID-19 vaccines or applications of artificial intelligence in industrial robots or medical imaging. Context matters. Returning to the question this essay explores, that is, to what extent can models be useful tools for gaining a deeper understanding of the relationships between Christianity and science? The answer is that models are useful, but limited tools for exploring the complex, diverse, dynamic, and nuanced nature of the relationships between Christianity and science. As Dr. Jaeger mentioned yesterday in her plenary election, modeling is a rigorous method of seeking the truth. Yet no single model adequately embraces all the complexities characterizing the diverse interactions between Christianity and science. Barbour reminds us, all models are limited and partial, and none gives a complete and adequate picture of reality. The world is diverse, and differing aspects of it indeed may be better represented by one model than another. We need diverse models to remind us of these differences. In addition, the use of diverse models can keep us from the idolatry that occurs when we take any one model of God too literally. Only in worship can we acknowledge the mystery of God and the pretensions of any system of thought claiming to have mapped out God's ways. The Christian theology of nature model offers the Christian believer a starting place for the pursuit of truth, for reconciling science with their faith, as well as a potential pathway for communicating or commending their faith to others. It is appropriate only as long as it is suitably qualified by proper attention to revealed theology. In consideration or selection of a model, context is important. It's still true that where one stands often depends on one where sits, that is, their social, cultural, or institutional backgrounds. I think that we still find ourselves today kind of like Paul mentioned at the end of 1 Corinthians, of knowing in part. And because of that, I think a certain amount of intellectual humility is required as we discuss the context and the relationships between Christianity and science. And lastly, we were asked to share some resources that may be useful for consideration of this topic, and here are 4 that I would offer.
Very good. Thank you, Don. And we will hold questions on Don's talk until after the next talk when we have a block of 20 minutes.